Hello again. As any of you know, I'm a pretty big firearms enthusiast, and over the last 2 years, I've been getting a lot of calls that go something like this. Hi, I have a friend. They've never shot a firearm before. They've become interested, or they're thinking about buying a firearm. Would you be willing to take them out and teach them a little bit about firearms? My answer is always yes. I think introducing people to the sport is one of the most rewarding parts of the shooting sports. I really enjoy it. But it takes a little patience and a little know-how and things like that. And today I'd like to discuss some of the things I do and the pieces, parts, and firearms that I use to teach that. So the first thing I want to start is by talking about the place to take them shooting. I belong to a range that's very, very nice. It's quiet, doesn't have a lot of traffic. It has roofed over benches and chairs. It even has rests for the rifles if it's necessary. Those things are very important when you're first teaching someone how to shoot. You want them to be comfortable. You want them to, instead of focusing on shaking the gun or whatever, they're focused on, okay, I'm looking right down the sights and I see it. Because the best thing is when you're taking someone out, they take their first shot and they hit a target. They love that, and it makes a huge difference. So making sure that they have some place to sit, a bench is the perfect way to start. If you're in a backyard or a gravel pit, check with your local laws first. But I would a lot of times lay it across the back of a four-wheeler, things like that. Try not to shoot your four-wheeler, that's awful. But those are some of the things that I do. One of the things you will definitely want to bring, because these people have no idea, ear protection. It's nothing is worse than ringing ears, and the sound can scare people. It can put them right off, especially when you get into larger calibers or shorter barreled firearms. A 22 sounds like nothing out of a long barrel, but once you switch to a pistol, all of a sudden it's very obnoxious. So I recommend having just a pack of these for people. What I use for myself is the Razor Walker, or pardon me, Walker Razors. They're electronic headphones that cancel out noise. The great part is, in between shots, I can hear everything that's going on. When a shot comes on, it reaches a certain decibel level, shuts off, comes back on a half a second later, or whatever that timing is. I'm not that smart. And it's great. I can hear everything everyone's saying. I can hear people who are on one side of the range versus the other. So it's definitely an aid when I'm teaching people. And it's something that I really recommend, especially if you're going to do a lot of shooting. They're fairly comfortable. They're light. When I bought these, which was a few years ago, they were less than $50. I'm sure they're more now. So, eye protection is recommended. I don't always wear it. I know I should. Sometimes it interferes with things, but it's probably a good idea to wear it at all times. The yellow lenses you'll see at Walmart or in shooting stores, they're great, they're fine. I find that their best use is at dusk or dawn. Other than that, they're not really a necessity. Clear ones are fine, or whatever they're comfortable with. So that's the big deal. The other thing I wanted to talk about with people is targets. So the best type of target is something that's reactive. This is just a simple one. You can see from the scratches that it reacts. That way it's easier for them to see where their bullet is impacting, if it impacts at all, because that can be a problem too. So you can see here from the scratch marks that when a bullet impacts it, there's going to be a white ring around where it goes. Against a black background, it's very easy for them to see, gets people excited. It's a very nice tool to have. There's some out there that are green that turn red. There's many different types, but this is what I recommend to start with. A lot of people just shoot at paper plates. That's fine. I try to add a little bit of excitement to it for people. The other thing that I like to do is I like to start people at the shortest range I can. 15 yards, 25 yards tops. Anything more than that, they're starting to struggle. They have a hard time. And when it's becoming difficult, when it's your first time out, it's not fun. So those are some things to look at. If you're in a place where you can do it, at the range where I take people, it's paper targets only. One of the things that we used to use as kids, which is a lot of fun, is a pie plate. You can hear the bullet impact on it, and that's always great for someone who's first time shooting because they hear it. Wow, I heard it. I know I hit it. That's great. One other thing that I'll recommend is if you have issues with eyes or weak eyes, or if the person who you're teaching has weak eyes, just a pair of good binoculars so that they can look down. These are just some regular old Bushnells. It's just what I use. So they can look down the range and maybe get a look at what they're doing, especially when you move them to 50 and 100 yards. But honestly, if available, I like to let people walk up and down the range, because then they get up to the target, they really look at it, they get excited, and if they want, you can switch out targets, you can talk to them, show them the bullet placement, things like that. I usually carry, I don't have one set out here, I usually carry 1 or 2 markers, sometimes 3 in different colors, so we can mark the circles, around each shot, write down, their groupings. It's a thing to get them to look at it and see and go, wow, I've tightened up, or wow, I haven't improved, etc. And if it's really nice, a lot of people like to take it home. So that's another thing to have in your tool belt, is a couple of different colored markers so you can show the different groupings. Other than that, that's the basic stuff you're going to need for that. I want to show you, range etiquette is something obviously that you'll have to teach people. It depends on your range and where you are. Teaching people, hey, don't walk down the range till you've talked to everybody across it. Be mindful. Those are normal things that anyone can teach, so I don't really need to touch on that much. What I would like to do is discuss the firearms that I use when I'm showing people how to shoot, or when I'm introducing someone to the sports. I find that these ones work for me. You may not have these, you may not have something similar. I'm just going to show you the points and counterpoints of what I use when I'm showing people. So this is a Marlin 880 SS with a 4-power shooter's edge scope on it. I've owned it for many, many years. It was my first rifle, my first .22 rifle. I've taught a lot of people to shoot on it, including my wife. It's a .22, it's a fairly heavy barrel, it's stainless steel, it's micro groove, so it's very accurate. Unfortunately, this model is not currently in production. It's a shame. The reason that I really like teaching people to shoot with it's a bolt action, which is the most common for firearms that you're going to be hunting with, so it'll help them be familiar with it. The other thing I like about it, it has a small detachable magazine. I think this one holds 7 rounds. This is an aftermarket, so it does have some issues. We'll go over that in a minute. The other thing is the safety is clearly marked. It literally says safe here and literally says fire here, so they don't have to worry about what color is it. Is the ring out? Is it white? Is it? They just, oh, says safe, says fire. Excellent. The other thing about this is, yes, it has a scope on it. It's 4-power. It's probably a little much for a .22, but what it allows people to do is really see what they're shooting at. Because when it's your first time shooting, if I can get a first time shooter to put their first round onto a target, even if they're not in the red, that's extremely exciting. Extremely exciting for them and for me. Because this is a person that I've just gone through, and all of a sudden, bam, they're on target. A lot of people who have come to me have said, oh, I don't think I'm going to be on target. And I tell them that if you're not on the target with your first shot, I've done my job poorly. So that's something I like to look forward to. Once again, it's a bolt action. It's very simple. Forward, down, back, out. Okay. One of the things that I like to do with people at first is I remove the bolt, remove the magazine, make sure it's clear. Okay, you can look down in the cut here, see that you're clear, there's nothing there, nothing in here, and you can still use the trigger. It still has some spring to it, but nothing happens. So what I like to tell people is I like to get them lined up, get them on the bench, get this in a rest or on a rolled up something so that it's secured, and I have them look down the scope, put it on target, and just squeeze the trigger. Okay. You just line up and just squeeze the trigger. And that gets them used to that motion that they're going to have to do. The other thing is you may have to teach people to move backwards or forward for the eye relief, depending on if the scope is set up for you or for someone else, their height, etc. The last lady that I taught to shoot was about 5'1", so obviously my eye relief was a little difficult for her at first. So that's, like I said, that's something that you can do. It's also a training guide for anyone. You know, pull your bolt out. You can do this with any of your hunting rifles that are capable of doing this. You pull it out, you can focus on it, and just get used to pulling your trigger. And it really helps you familiarize with that. It alleviates some of the flinch at first. So that's the thing. And with this, bolt goes right back in. We're set. We're easy to go. It's an easy to load magazine. It's got a low load spring, so it doesn't take a lot of pressure to put it in there. You will have to help people load the magazines at first. It's just a thing. Sometimes I've actually messed up. You know, you'll have one catch on a rim. It's no big deal. But this is a nice place to start. It's a 22. Ammunition is cheap. There's very little recoil, and it's just a lot of fun to shoot. And it's great for people who are beginning because it's not going to beat them up. And like I said, this just goes in here. One of the things I want to talk about with these aftermarket magazines is if you can see it stick slightly. If your bolt is open and you place it in here, it can go up too far, and that causes a problem. So you just have to pull it back a little bit. The only thing you can do about that is put the magazine in when the bolt is closed. That makes it easier. But once again, that's not a failing of the model, that's a failing of the crappy aftermarket magazine that I bought for it. So that's the basic way that I start people on rifle. Moving on, one of the most popular things these days is a shotgun. Everybody is kind of familiar with a shotgun. We've all heard about it on the news. It's a great place to start. You can use it for many, many things. The problem is that shotguns are a little stout. A 12 gauge will beat you up. 20 gauge a little better. So what I like to start people off with is this little 410. It's a Stoeger coach gun in 410 3-inch mag. 3-inch chamber. It's a break action. It's very simple. It's got an automatic safety every time you break and close it, so that you don't have to worry about someone accidentally pulling that. You've got 2 triggers, one for the left barrel, one for the right barrel. Very simple, very easy. You know, you put the shells in one at a time and then close it. Very simple. Okay, 1, 2, in they go. Close the action. It's already on safe. It's a very great teaching tool. We're going to unload it though, because I got to show you some things. So once again, you would fire it and then just pull the empty casings out and put new ones in. The reason why I like to use this, even though people will say a 410 has very little use, you can shoot rabbits and squirrels with it, things like that small. But this is a fairly heavy gun. It's fairly short, and it's chambered in 410, which means they're going to have the fun of shooting a shotgun and seeing a spread, but they're not going to get beat up. 12. We've all seen the videos. We've all heard the horror stories of someone who hands someone who can't handle it a 12 gauge or a double barrel, tells them to pull both triggers. It beats them up, and they never want to play with firearms again. Don't need that. There's no reason for it. It's not even that funny. You just keep someone from enjoying the sport forever because they don't want to deal with you. So this is something I start people off with. Like I said, very simple. Nothing can really go wrong. And they still get to see a shotgun spread when it shoots. For those of you who don't know, there's 2 different types of shot shells. One is a solid slug. It's just a big hunk of lead. Looks like a round cylinder, and that's for hitting larger animals. The other one is small pebbles of lead, basically, small BBs. And that's for shooting small game animals, things like that, or shooting targets, or breaking clay pigeons. So this is a good place to start. They can't really mess this up. And it's easy for you to know when and where. And the thing is, like I said, it is a heavy gun, but that helps soak up recoil, so it's really not beating on them. I find that people really enjoy when they hit something with a blast of pellets, because, wow, look at that spread. It's something new, it's something novel, it's something they're not used to. Once again, use what you've got. If you've got something in the 20 gauge, that's great. If all you have is a 12 gauge, I recommend finding some of those Aguila 1-inchers if it'll fire them, because they're low recoil, they're small, they're not as loud. get people used to it. The thing to avoid is recoil and flinch when you're first teaching someone to shoot. You want to work up to that. You don't just hand someone something like a 44 Magnum and expect them to shoot, because it becomes a problem, and that stays with them for a very long time. So this is the shotgun that I like to start people off on, and it's worked very well for me. If you live in a state that will allow you to let someone else shoot your handguns, and once again check with your local laws because that can be finicky, I recommend starting with a .22 pistol. And the one that I use for that is this. This is a J.C. Higgins Model 88. They do not make them anymore. It is what's called a double single. It can function in double action or single action. Okay. It holds 9 rounds of .22 long rifle. It's a fine little firearm. What I like about it is it doesn't kick, it's small, and it's a revolver, so there's not many moving parts. It's fairly simple to use. Very user-friendly. It's just kind of a pop. The round goes down range, everyone's happy. I recommend a single or a double single action in .22. I do not recommend you start someone off with a semi-automatic in .22 unless you really know your firearm and really know your ammunition, because I've seen them jam all the time. It's just they're constant. It's a jam-o-matic unless you have the exact right ammunition. With a revolver, you don't have that issue, because one of the worst things, and I've seen this on the range, is when a gun fails or it squibs or it jams and you have a new shooter and they can either panic or that sticks with them and they think they did something wrong when in fact they've done absolutely nothing. So that's why I like to start with something that's reliable and easy. Once again, a lot of people who I have taught like to start off at the single action. Once again, we know we're clear, which is where you pull the hammer back and it holds itself. And that makes the trigger much easier to pull. It's a much lower one, as you can see, and then you just have to continue to do that. It revolves the cylinder. Off we go. When you're in double action mode, everything is done by pulling the trigger, which is much heavier, and people tend to shake more with it. They don't become comfortable with it. So they'll start off with the single action. When they're comfortable, I move them up to, hey, just go ahead and pull the trigger through. And that takes some feel. If you've shot a lot of revolvers especially, you'll know where the break is and things like that. But for them, this is all new. Okay, and then I like to teach them, how to empty it out, how to reload it. There's many different kinds, but I think a revolver in .22 is the best way to start if you can teach someone pistols. Once again, check with your local laws before you go and hand someone a pistol, because you might commit a crime that way. Yes, I know it doesn't fit in the holster. It's just the one that I had sitting around. The other pistol that I have specifically for teaching people shooting, and it's something that I also enjoy shooting, is this little ACP Shield. It's a 380 Easy. It's the 2.0. It has a lot of good qualities for someone who's first learning to shoot or for other people. One of the reasons that I bought it specifically was I took an older friend out shooting. He hadn't been shooting in a while, but he missed the sport, and he had a lot of trouble with my 9mm. Couldn't rack the slide, magazines were difficult for him, on and on. So I started looking around, and I had some ideas, and then a week later I was visiting my parents, and my mother had basically decided she wasn't going to carry anymore because she could no longer actuate the slide on her 9mm. She was having issues with it. So I really started looking around, and that's when I found this. And it's called an Easy because everything on it is made to be easier. The slide moves much easier. The buttons are a little bit easier to use. The magazines are fantastic. They have a small nub here on the side, so when you're loading it, you can just take your thumb and push down on it, or if you really have trouble, put it on a table, grab the nubs, and push down with both your hands. It makes it much easier to load. It's a nice little firearm. It's chambered in 380, which has very little recoil, and once upon a time was cheap and available. I find that it's a nice thing to start off when you're first showing people semi-automatic pistols. The other reason that I like showing it to people or teaching people with it is there's no safety other than this grip safety, which some people will say is a bad thing, and I can understand the argument. But if they're not squeezing this, it won't go off. But that's one less thing people have to worry about. They don't have to stop and think, and they just look down and go, okay, I'm grabbing it, I'm clearly ready to go. It's a nice pistol to start people off with that, especially if they're weaker hands or of a smaller stature and have difficulty racking a slide. And that's specifically the reason I bought it. To illustrate the fact that it has less recoil, I have here a few rounds I'd like to show you. And this is your 9mm NATO. Once again, everyone's familiar with this. We're all used to this. This is your 380. So you can see it has less powder, a little bit smaller bullet, and it's a little bit easier to shoot. So that's why I like to start people off with that. Once again, my whole point is to reduce recoil, make everyone have a good time, enjoy themselves, and they'll be back and they'll join the gun community and they'll become shooters or hunters or just people who come to the range and have fun. And that is the whole point of what we do, and I hope this helps you or maybe gives you an aid. If there's any questions or anything, please go ahead and leave it in the comments and let me know. Thank you.